Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar. My name is Ndombi Khatebe Tsodetsi. I am a senior manager in the Green Economy Unit at the Innovation Hub. I am going to be facilitating today's session, and I'm looking forward to a great discussions and perhaps an understanding on why is it important for countries to adopt this particular system. Please note that we will take all the questions and comments during the Q&A session, but you are more than welcome to just pop in your questions or comments in the chat box throughout the sessions, and then we'll take care of them during the Q&A session. Colleagues, without wasting time, I would like to take this opportunity and call in our host, Dr. Nompumelelo Oboko, who is a Chief Executive Officer for the South African Council for Natural Scientists profession, to do the welcome for us and also to give us the purpose of today's session. Dr. Oboko, you can take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for those introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Sanibonani, Avsheni. It is indeed with great pleasure that I welcome you all to this insightful webinar on how South Africa can transition towards a secular economy. Today, we will delve into one of the most pressing challenges of our time, reshaping our economic systems to create a more sustainable and regenerative future. It is now evident, especially from the massive research that has been conducted over the years, that the traditional linear model of take, make, dispose can no longer sustain the needs of our growing population. Our resources are limited, and the environmental consequences of our current economic practices are becoming increasingly apparent. We find ourselves grappling with pollution, resource depletion, and climate change, and all of these challenges demand urgent and innovative solutions. I must say that in the midst of all these challenges lies an opportunity, a great opportunity for us to reimagine, to rethink and transform our economic systems through the concept of the circular economy, which seeks really to decouple economic growth from resource consumption by designing our waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and most importantly, regenerating natural systems. The circular economy offers, therefore, a blueprint for a sustainable and prosperous future in South Africa and globally, where waste is minimized, resources are conserved, and the economic value is maximized. So today we have the privilege of hearing from our esteemed experts and thought leaders who have dedicated their time and their lives to driving this transformative change in the country. They will share with us their knowledge, insights, and experiences on how we can shift as a country towards a circular economy. What are the benefits that it holds for businesses, for communities and the environment, as well as the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Throughout the webinar, I encourage all of us to actively participate. Let us engage in meaningful discussions and share our perspectives. Let us harness the collective wisdom that is present in this virtual platform, gathering and to explore practical strategies, innovative approaches, and collaborative actions that will pave the way towards a circular economy in South Africa. So what it means that will require a collective effort which involves government, and I'm happy today we have a representative from government, businesses, civil society, and all of us as stakeholders. And I thank each and every one of you for being here today, as it demonstrates your commitment to a sustainable future. This is a future that harmonizes economic prosperity with environmental stewardship. I encourage all of us to continue to redesign, to reduce, to reuse, renew, repair, recycle, and retrieve products to give them new uses. So I thank you, Program Director, with these short words of welcome and wishing all of us a very productive session. And I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oboko, for the warm welcome. Colleagues, I think without wasting time, I think we are all looking forward to hear what the experts are going to share with us today. Now that we have been welcomed, I would like to introduce our very first expert, Dr. Henry Roman, who is currently an acting chief director for sector innovation and green economy at the DSI. Dr. Roman holds a PhD in biotechnology from Rhodes University, specializing in the bioremediation of acid mine drainage. He has 18 years experience in the National System of Innovation in various roles, with 11 of these at DSI. Dr. Henry has led the development of 2 roadmaps related to the green economy ambitions of South Africa to guide research, development, and innovation in the water and waste sectors. He's a member of the Advisory Panel for Sustainable Seas Trust, the Inano Water Center at UNISA, a board member for the Institute for Water Research at Rhodes University, and a past steering committee member of the Partnership for Action on Green Economy, as well as the Switch Africa Green Program in South Africa. He is currently working on developing an STI strategy for circular economy. Over to you, Dr. Henry.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Madam Program Director, for that introduction. And also thank you to Dr. Oboko for the great introduction to the topic for the day as well. As introduced, my name is Henry Roman. I'm with the Department of Science and Innovation, where I'm working on developing the STI for circular economy strategy, as per the title of the slide. So going into it, so just starting for those who may not be familiar with the DSI, our vision as a national department in South Africa is for increased well-being and prosperity through science, technology, and innovation. And our mission is to provide the leadership and enabling environment and resources for science, technology, and innovation to support South Africa's inclusive sustainable development. Now, going into what a circular economy is, it's very important to note that it is about the economy. There's only one economy, right? So we can't be talking about multiple types of economies. We're trying to transform the current linear economic model that's been in place for more than 200 years. And an argument, I suppose, can be made that we are in this position we are in globally because of this linear model, which has led to pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, etc., that have contributed to climate effects, into a much more sustainable circular economy one. And I hope by the end of the presentation, you'll have a better understanding what I mean by a more sustainable circular economy one. So firstly, in contrast to that linear economic model, a circular economy looks at keeping materials and products in circulation for as long as possible. So through things such as the reuse of products, the sharing of underused assets. And here, the classic example here is Uber. Do you really need a car, or can you just use a car for when you actually require it? Repairing, recycling, and remanufacturing. And then there are 3 basic principles for a circular economy. The first is to design out waste and pollution in your industrial processes. Keep products and materials in use for as long as they are economically viable. And the last one, regeneration of natural systems. So I'll touch on that one again. But so what does this actually mean then? It means two things, at least to me. It means the minimizing the need to extract primary resources. And that speaks to the third principle of regenerating natural systems. The less we extract, the less impact we have on the environment. And secondly, it will reduce waste because we're trying to keep products and materials in use for as long as possible, and we're trying to design waste out. So circular economy is not merely about waste management or recycling or reuse or reduction alone. It's all of those things and much more than that. And that is why the DSI is also looking into it, but we're looking into it as a systemic transformation of the economy through science, technology, and innovation. Now, looking at our own policy landscape, in 2019, the White Paper on Science, Technology, and Innovation, or STI, was released, and it identified circular economy as a new source of growth for the country. It also recognized that this has to be a systemic approach. In 2022, the STI Decadal Plan was released. And here, the principles to be applied through targeted interventions include waste and pollution reduction, regenerative systems, and sustainable materials management. So the three principles of a circular economy. I have to mention also that the other policy document is the National Waste Management Strategy, released in, I think it was 2020, by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment, where they have they're wanting to put in place a circular economy action plan in relation to management of waste. So a slightly different approach. They're looking at the entry point into a circular economy being waste management, whereas the DSI is recognizing that, but also looking at the broader perspective of a circular economy. Now, how did we, as a department, come to this point as well? So this is just outlining the directorate that I'm part of, Environmental Services and Technologies. And if you look, there's a number of items here. There's the waste RDI roadmap, the water RDI roadmap. We've got a program around enviropreneurs called Invalisi. We had RDI platforms that's looking at catchment-based adaptation. I am also known as the national designated entity for South Africa for the Climate Technology Center and Network, which is under the UNFCCC. And I have oversight of the South African Risk and Vulnerability Atlas, which is an atlas that is a spatial database for climate predictive modeling. So if you look under waste, which is, like I said, the entry point, we've got two SACHI chairs, Waste in Society and Waste in Climate Change. We also I'm just picking highlights here. This isn't all that we've done in these various pillars. We contributed to the Waste Speaker Integration Guidelines of DFFE, but we also looked at the economic value. We did a techno-economic valuation of waste in South Africa, and that told us we have approximately 17 billion rand of resources which currently go to landfill or into a hole in the ground. So there is some economic potential here as in the starting point of a circular economy. Underwater, we've got WADA, the WADA platform, which is a water technology demonstration platform. We have the Living Catchments Program, operated by SANBI, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and that speaks to that regeneration of nature aspect of a circular economy. We also did some work around big data and transboundary aquifers, and this touches on the digitization of the circular economy. There's a lot of data that needs to be collected, analyzed, visualized in order to allow for decision makers to make good decisions. And we also have a SACHI chair there in water and sanitation economics, because the economics of water is vital to our country. Under the Enviropreneurs, I'm quickly going to highlight some of these 3 companies that came through this program, which is an ideation program. It's not an incubation program. So Foy Science is all 3 of these are women-owned businesses as well. And Foy Science is a cosmetics business founded by Norma Shlubi Ndazo, and she was one of the first Enviropreneurs. She recently partnered with the CSIR's biorefinery industry development facility, where she is looking at incorporating keratin that's derived from chicken waste, chicken feathers, into her skincare products. Nshidi Polo Waste Management is founded by Lebogang Maponya, and she has already branched out into Polokwane. She has a head office in Pretoria. It's a waste management company, which that's what they do. So I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. The last one, Growbox, was started by Renshaw Manuel in 2016 in Cape Town. And this one is a social enterprise. And for every 2 of the vegetable garden boxes sold, 1 is sponsored to a disadvantaged household. This also, by placing these urban vegetable gardens into communities, it shortens supply chains to those communities. And also, she also hosts urban farmers markets. And she has recently, in 2020, launched an urban vegetable production farm in Hanover Park on the Cape Flats. Now, the RDI platforms work started through restoration work that was being done by the Natural Resource Management team at DFFE. And that evolved into the Living Catchments work, where we're looking at the governance of catchments in secure water source areas in South Africa. As the NDE, we've done some work in the cement sector. We've looked at the technology needs assessment and downscaling it to provincial and district municipality. And the strategy we're developing is also with the CTCN. And then the other one, the last one we're doing is relevant for our times, is demand side management for electricity that's being done with the CSR. This is just a timeline, and the slides will be shared, of how our policy has evolved since 1996, since the white paper on science and technology, where environmental sustainability was already recognized, to where we are today, where we initiated the development of the STI for circular economy strategy. We've launched Circular Innovation South Africa at CSR, and we've launched the Circular Economy Demonstration Fund. And I'll speak to the last 2 towards the end. But critically, also, we didn't just come up with the idea because the rest of the world is looking at this. We were exposed to this idea of a circular economy in 2017, but we didn't have a proper understanding. So we needed to get an understanding of what this means. And in 2019, we started the work to engage with various partners to understand what circular economy may mean to South Africa. And this is just a timeline showing you from 2019 through to 2020. And I apologize, the date for the symposium is incorrect. It's November 2020. We first started with contextualizing circular economy for South Africa, and there we partnered with Green Cape to look at that. And that raised some of the areas we started looking at, like electricity, water, waste, agriculture. And then we partnered with the European Union on what they call the SA-EU Dialogue Facility. And through that facility, we hosted a circular economy symposium. As I said, from 19 to 22 November 2019, not 2020. I'll correct that before I send it. But you can also, what's important to note is the nature of the partners that came on board. You can see it's a broad range of partners that came in to talk to the topic at the symposium. We then had a circular economy study tour to Europe, where we visited Spain and Brussels and the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands is a global leader on the topic of circular economy and assist many countries in developing out their own strategies as well. And we also did a lessons learned workshop post that in order to refine our thinking around circular economy. And this is what we came up with, is this draft framework to inform the circular economy strategy. I won't go through it in detail. It's quite in depth, but important to look at here is we need an alignment to national development objectives and global goals. SDGs, NDCs, for those that don't know, that's the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement of the COP meetings. So how do we as a country respond to these things we've signed up to do? It has to be linked to the key SDI policy in the country, your white paper, the NACI Foresight study, which also illustrated that waste, water, energy, food nexus, a low carbon, climate resilient economy, and mobility in communities is very important to a shifting of the economy. It also identified certain capabilities and sectors in which to operate. And everything needs to be underpinned by those three circular economy principles. But importantly, it shows that the importance of coordination across government for circular economy, as well as collaboration with stakeholders. So in response to the decadal plan, the DSI is developing this SDI-led circular economy strategy. And importantly for us, the strategy will be based on evidence-led and knowledge-based policymaking to drive the transition to a circular economy. As I said before, it's focused on taking a systems approach beyond the waste sector. And it will rely on approaching these strategies for circular economy from a sectoral perspective. And Professor Godfrey will speak to that aspect of it as well. But critically, as I said, that coordination across government is so important if we want to shift the system. So we're taking a whole of economy approach, and that requires very, very strong partnership between government departments. So an intergovernmental committee has been established to guide the SDI for circular economy strategy. And here's the list of departments invited and who are participating on that steering committee in the development of the strategy. Now, coming to circular economy in South Africa, where we are right now. So we've launched Circular Innovation South Africa as an initiative of the DSI, but hosted at the CSR, and Prof. Godfrey is the person who's managing that office. And this will give effect to the decadal plan and the SDI for CE strategy. We also launched the Circular Economy Demonstration Fund, which is a response to the findings of the work that has been done. And the first call has been issued already, and it's looking at scaling CE interventions through partnerships between higher education institutions, science councils, and the private sector. In closing, this is the team working with me and together with Professor Godfrey. It's very rare for both of us to talk one after the other at a platform like this. But it also demonstrates the strong partnership that is required in order to move forward. This transition to a circular economy cannot be done by one department, by one entity. We have to put our heads together and bring all the intellect that we can to the table in order to address what is a highly complex system change that is required. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry, for that presentation. By that, we can see that a lot of work is happening already within the circular economy system. Thank you so much for laying that solid foundation. I am happy that your presentation at least unpacked what we mean by a circular economy and clarifying the fact that it is not about waste recycling only. And we are looking forward to that STI strategy. I think without me wasting better time or starting a discussion around this, I would like to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Professor Linda Godfrey, who is a principal scientist and associate professor at CSIR and Northwest University. Professor Linda Godfrey is a principal scientist at the CSIR and an extraordinary professor at the Northwest University, South Africa, and holds a PhD in engineering. She has over 20 years of sector experience, and she manages circular innovation South Africa and the Waste Research Development and Innovation Roadmap Implementation Unit on behalf of the government. She has provided strategic input to a number of local, regional, and international waste and circular economy initiatives for the United Nations, European Union, and the World Bank, as well as the South African government. She lectures internationally on solid waste management in developing countries, including the social, economic, and environmental opportunities of waste within a circular economic context. She has published extensively in the field of the waste economy. Professor Linda Godfrey, you may take the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and I'm hoping that everyone can see both me and my screen, so please just shout if there are any technical problems. Thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to present this morning and to follow on from Dr. Henry Roman as well. I think just reiterating the support that we have from the South African government in transitioning to a more circular economy and why it's so important for South Africa to do that. And so I want to touch on this morning, first of all, in terms of what is this concept, the circular economy, and why is it so important from an economic, a social, and an environmental perspective for South Africa to consider this transition. So first of all, let's look at the global level. Where are we in terms of circularity? Well, the latest circularity gap report that was recently published showed that we're only 7.2% circular. And the unfortunate thing is that we're heading in the wrong direction. If you look at the previous reports, essentially rising material extraction has shrunk global circularity from 9.1% in 2018 down to 8.6% in 2020 to now only 7.2% in 2023. And so when you look at, well, how do we measure this concept of circularity? In its simplest form, it's a measure of total material and waste flows and their loop closing. And the circularity metric, which is what the circularity gap report reports on, is a measure of the materials that are essentially cycled back into the global economy at the end of their useful life. And that's what was the 7.2%. And so when you just look at this metric that's reported on, one of the questions that I always get asked is, well, is the circular economy just a fancy new term for waste recycling? And Henry touched on that as well, and also in the opening introductions. You know, are we just talking about the same thing, but just giving it a new name? And my answer to that is always no. The circular economy is not about waste management, and it's definitely not a synonym for recycling. I think it's important that we adopt this perspective that the circular economy is really about sustainable resource management. And I go so far as to say that the circular economy is about national resource security in support of socio-economic development through sustainable resource utilization. So why do I say this? Well, let's look at the South African context. This is a material flow analysis that was undertaken by UCT in partnership with BOKU, and it was funded by the Department of Science and Innovation. And it showed us that the South African economy is almost in line with global standards. We're around 7% circular, and most of that is due to ecological cycling. And as we know, we've got a largely extractive-based economy. We extract minerals, metals. A lot of that is exported in unbeneficiated form into the global economy. We've got large throughputs of energy, water, materials in the system, with a tiny amount of material flowing back into the economy. And so this material flow analysis provides us, and this concept of a circular economy provides us with a useful lens through which to look at how we as a country are using our resources. So it forces us to ask questions in terms of saying, do we actually understand our resource base in South Africa? What are we extracting? Do we have the resources, for example, to meet and sustain our development objectives as a country? Has anybody ever looked at the National Development Plan and said, do we as a country have the resources we need to achieve the NDP 2030? And if we don't, what plan do we need to put in place to ensure that those objectives are met? What are we importing and exporting? Is exporting our resources into the global economy in the best interest of the country? In terms of the throughput of resources, where in the economy do we see the greatest demand for resources? And also, where are we seeing the largest throughput and wastage, whether it be in gaseous, liquid, or solid form? Very importantly, what proportion of our resources is actually going into local stock building? And this material flow analysis actually showed us that by international standards, very little of our own resources actually go into building our own stock as a country, whether it be roads, rail, dams, buildings, infrastructure. Very little of our resources are actually building our local stock. And then importantly, what proportion of our resources flow back into the economy, or what is wasted at end of life and essentially disposed of to the environment, whether the terrestrial or aquatic environment. And so the circular economy allows us to explore this resource concept, whether it be in the mining sector, whether it be in terms of our trade, whether it be in manufacturing, agriculture, energy, our cities, towns, mobility, and also in terms of waste and the environment. And so I think with this as context, we have to say, well, where are we heading? Where are we heading both internationally, and where are we heading as a country? And I think the reality is that never before have we actually had so much access to global, regional, and local evidence that highlights our increasing demand. And you can see the graph on the left-hand side, the increasing demand for natural resources, many of which are finite, the associated impacts with that demand, and the continued depletion. And certainly both from this publication as well as the Circularity Gap Report and the work of the International Resources Panel is we're seeing the greatest demand in terms of minerals, and most of that in terms of non-metallic minerals, typically in the construction sector. So significant increase in demand as we move forward for resource consumption. And this increasing demand for resources has essentially created increasing risk of access. It's resulted in businesses, it's resulted in countries putting steps in place to understand that risk in terms of access to resources and to mitigate those risks. And so if you look at Europe, for example, the European Commission identified back in 2011 already 14 critical raw materials, which were essentially considered necessary for European industry and value chains, but weren't necessarily found in the ground within the EU region. And so access to them could be considered a constraint in terms of their own development. That was updated in 2014, and that increased from 14 to 20, again in 2017, and again in 2020, it was updated to 30 critical raw materials. And so we asked ourselves within the CSIR, we asked ourselves this question, well, what are South Africa's critical raw materials? What do we need and have to achieve, for example, the NDP 2030? But there's also increasing risk in terms of access to resources for South Africa. And we've seen this just over the last decade. We've seen it in terms of energy, the energy and certainly electricity insecurity that we've had in South Africa since 2007. Just recently, I saw a publication, the cost to the South African economy of the electricity insecurity has been in excess of 1.2 trillion rand, and that doesn't include the 2023 figures from load shedding this year. We've seen it in terms of water. the cost of the drought in the Western Cape to the regional agricultural economy was estimated to be just short of 6 billion rand. And obviously agriculture is one of the most water intense sectors of our economy. So the first to really experience the implications of water insecurity. We see it still currently in the Eastern Cape, where the financial losses in terms of livestock production due to the droughts is estimated to be 6.4 billion. And just up until 2020, the drought relief funding was already at 120 million. So government having to divert funding that could have gone into various other mechanisms to support development, having to be redirected into relief funding as a consequence of water insecurity and resource insecurity. And we've seen it in materials as well. We've seen the impact in terms of that the pandemic had on the disruption of global supply chains. It resulted in increased costs that we've experienced in South Africa and probably still are experiencing in South Africa. And in answer to that question, in terms of what is South Africa's critical raw materials, the study that the CSR then did, which was funded by the DSI, showed that we have 18 critical raw materials, 5 of which have less than 50 years of economically viable mining remaining. And for most of those 5, more than 90% of those resources are exported internationally. And so we lose our ability to implement circularity measures to get those resources back again at end of life. So they are lost from us once we have exported. And so to answer the first question, is the circular economy an economic imperative for South Africa? Absolutely it is, because the circular economy provides us with this lens to understand both our resource availability and our use. And it provides us with a way to manage the risks, but also to unlock the opportunities to support national development. So yes, absolutely, it ticks the first box that it is an economic imperative to understand and manage our risks with regards to resources. It's also absolutely an environmental imperative. The work published by the International Resources Panel, for example, showed that resource extraction and processing is responsible for 50% of climate impacts, 90% of water stress, and 90% of biodiversity loss. And so if we can decouple economic development from resource consumption, we have the ability to address these major environmental challenges that are facing us not only as a country, but globally. And certainly the latest Circularity Gap report shows us that if we drive circularity in just 4 global systems, in terms of food, so that's in our agriculture, agri and agro-processing, in terms of manufacturing, in our built environment, and mobility and transport, just in those 4 sectors, we have the ability to reduce global virgin material extraction by 34% and reverse the overshoot of planetary boundaries to keep us within the 2 degrees temperature rise. So absolutely, yes, it's an environmental imperative as well. And thirdly, it is also a social imperative. And the reason for this is because essentially over the last decade, we've seen 4 big drivers emerge around a circular economy transition. The first has been resource scarcity, and I spoke around that, around the critical raw materials. The second has been in terms of climate mitigation, and I've just touched on that one. But when the pandemic hit, we heard these conversations about Build Back Better, a green economic recovery. And so we recognize that by driving a more circular economy transition, we have the ability to create new types of jobs, to unlock new businesses and new business models through this process of driving sustainable resource management. But importantly, and I think this is also particularly relevant for South Africa, in the Circularity Gap report, it notes that there will be job gains as well as job losses. There are winners and losers as we transition to a more circular economy. And so that's why it's so important that we recognize that and plan for that and mitigate those potential job losses as we move forward. And hence the recent work that has emerged around a just circular economy transition also being very relevant for South Africa. But also importantly, it's not just about jobs. It's around improved quality of life. It's around creating more livable cities. It's around greater food security. And I think all of these kinds of issues have particular relevance for South Africa, where we have people living in poverty, in poor housing conditions, going to bed hungry, for example, malnutrition. All of these issues have relevance to South Africa. And so what are we talking about, though, tangibly when we talk about the circular economy? Because this is a very high-level concept, and sometimes it can be quite vague, despite highlighting the imperatives of why we transition to it. And so if you look just at the three principles, for example, and these were the three principles that we as the CSR adopted, and I'll touch on this in the next slide, around better understanding what the circular economy means for South Africa. It's really around how do we design out waste and pollution? How do we keep products and materials in use? And how do we regenerate natural systems? The circularity gap report refers to these, for example, as how do we use longer? How do we use again? And how do we make clean? And so, for example, in manufacturing, under that first principle, it would be things like designing for longevity, designing for circularity, product as service, entirely new business models that can emerge from that. And I think so much potential for South Africa and Africa to adopt more product as service opportunities. Resource efficiency and cleaner production, for example. Remanufacture, repair, recycling, industrial symbiosis are examples in that space. Why are we not driving a massive remanufacturing initiative in our automotive industry, for example? In making clean alternative materials, green renewable energy, for example, hydrogen economy. In agriculture, things like precision agriculture, intense water user, how do we decouple agricultural production from resource use? How do we bring food closer to users in terms of peri-urban and urban farming? How do we eliminate food losses and waste? At end of life of these products, can we unlock new high value end use products and markets in terms of biorefinery? Returning nutrients to soil in terms of shifting from chemical fertilizers and pesticides to more organic fertilizers and pesticides. Biogas, zero-till and intercropping, permaculture, for example. So you can see the diversity of examples. And one of the things I think that is key is when you look at this slide, you might say, well, a lot of this we've already been doing in South Africa. This is not new to us. And you're absolutely correct. When we looked into this, a lot of this is already in place in South Africa. But what we haven't yet achieved is the scale of impact that we would be looking for. So a lot of this is still at small scale, at demonstration scale, at pilot scale. And how do we ramp that up to achieve greater impact? And then I think also importantly to highlight is this additional concept that has been added to this. And that's the concept of sufficiency, which speaks to the fourth principle around using less. And in fact, it was in the IPC 6th assessment report where we first saw this concept of sufficiency defined as really a set of measures and daily practices that avoid demand for energy, materials, land, and water, while still delivering human well-being for all within planetary boundaries. But I think very importantly, and this is where we start to have this discussion of, well, what does the circular economy mean for the global north and what does it mean for the global south? Is it the same thing? Do we have different development paths? Equally, sufficiency, it means different things for different countries. We're all starting from different places. The global north may need to be asking itself, why are we using so many resources? Whereas the global south needs to be saying, can we actually use more resources to ensure sufficient development for all people? Or can we have a completely different development path that looks very different to the development path that the global north has adopted, a less resource intensive development path? And that's the exciting thing for me, for South Africa and Africa, is that we have the ability to invent our future as a continent that is a lot more sustainable, that is a lot more circular, and is a lot more sufficient. And so the CSR has stepped into this position to say, well, how do we evidence this transition? How do we support both the private and public sector to make the right kinds of decisions, whether it be in terms of policy, in terms of business decisions, to move us to a more sufficient and circular economy? And we've published a number of think pieces around this already. There are 8 short briefing notes across 7 different sectors of the economy. There's an open access book that has been published. The first 3 deep dive studies on mining, agriculture, and manufacturing are available online, and you can see the URL down at the bottom. And within the coming month, we will be publishing the deep dive studies into water and energy. And to answer the second driver question, is transitioning to a circular economy an opportunity to mitigate climate impacts? And so that will be the third report. And so in concluding my presentation this morning, Chair, I think if there's anything that you remember from my presentation this morning, it's these points. The first is that the circular economy is not about waste management. It is about sustainable resource management. There's absolutely more than substantial evidence now that shows us that transitioning to a circular economy is not a luxury, it's a must. It's an economic, a social, and an environmental imperative for South Africa, but in fact for every country. But I think we need to realize that we're all starting from different places. Transitioning to a more circular economy creates opportunities for new businesses, for new business models, which is exciting. I don't even think we've scratched the surface in terms of the new types of businesses that we'll see emerge in the circular economy space. But yes, the circular economy calls for disruption and it calls for innovation. And I think, again, that's what's so exciting if we're in the science, technology, and innovation engineering space, is that there's an exciting role for us to play in this transition as we move forward. But to reiterate the point that Henry made in his presentation is that this is a systems change that we're talking about here. And it's going to require partnerships. It's going to require greater collaboration. It's going to require the public and private sector to work more closely together. And it's going to require the national system of innovation to help evidence and support this transition as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Linda Godfrey, for that informative presentation. I think one of the things that you have been referring to in your presentation is a number of studies, interesting studies that you have been working on. And I think we will engage you privately just to find out how we can get hold of those studies. Obviously, in addition to the briefing notes that you have put on the screen there. Thank you so much for that information and for the presentation. And colleagues, I think without wasting time, because we are just left behind, I would like to call in our next speaker, Our next speaker is Professor John Ngoni-Zvimba, a research manager for Sustainable Integrated Wastewater Resources Futures. Dr. Ngoni is also an adjunct professor. I'm sorry, Professor John is also an adjunct professor with Great Zimbabwe University. Prof has over 20 years of research experience in sustainable municipal, industrial, and mining wastewater management, including transitioning water services to a circular economy. He is a current member of Water Institute of Southern Africa, International Water Association, and a chapter member of the African Circular Economy Network. Professor John, you may take the floor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Program Chair. Can you just confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I start, I must acknowledge our research partner, TrueSense Consulting Services, who have done the work that I'm going to present. And I'm going to shift really towards the water sector. And as you can see from the title of my presentation, it's Circular Economy Solutions in the Water Sector. The two presenters who have just come before me, they've actually made life easier for me for clearly defining what a circular economy in general is. And I won't really waste a lot of my time trying to repeat what they have actually done very well. What I'm just going to put context on is just to define what we consider water circular economy is, so that we can also understand how this applies to the water sector. So the water circular economy would refer to a system where water is used, treated, and reused in some kind of a closed loop, so that we minimize the use of virgin water and also reduce the impact on the environment. It will actually involve a number of processes that include collection, treatment, distribution of the water, including treatment and reuse of wastewater. And the goal for the water circular economy is to optimize and use the water resources and reduce the environmental impact of water use. This can be achieved through a combination of technological solutions. I will actually be touching on some of the technological solutions later, but we also need some policy measures, which I will also highlight later as really some of the barriers and challenges to transitioning to a full circular economy in the water sector, and also changes in societal behavior. In terms of benefits, what I would consider as high-level benefits of transitioning the water sector to a circular economy would include sustainability, restoration, and regeneration. I think the previous speakers have touched on that. Even the introductory remarks touched on some of those high-level benefits, and as far as circular economy is concerned. Right. We are currently in the traditional linear approach as far as the water and wastewater business cycle is concerned. And the schematic that I have on that presentation is actually indicating the need in terms of changing from your left to your right, so that we actually transition to a circular approach in terms of how we run our water and wastewater business. But what is critical is that transitioning to a water circular economy is also in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly if one looks at SDG 6 and SDG 12, there is some links there in terms of using this platform to achieve those goals, really, which we are supposed to achieve globally by 2030. The challenge that we have in terms of transitioning to a full water circular economy is due to the traditional linear economy settings that we find ourselves in. But for the water sector, we are fortunate that the International Water Association has been proactive enough to provide us with a framework that can assist utilities and other stakeholders in the water sector to actually transition to a water circular economy on the basis of 3 interrelated pathways. And these pathways include water, energy, and materials. For the South African context, I think we do relate to the importance of these 3 pathways. If we look at water, we are a water scarce country with 98% of resources already allocated. And we may face a 17 to 20% deficit by 2030. So making use of such a pathway to transition the water sector to a circular economy can bring in a lot of sustainability in support of water security. The energy pathway, again, is something that we relate to. I think we are going through an energy crisis at the moment with load shedding that is ongoing. So it is important that we can actually draw some energy security in terms of that respective pathway. Materials pathway as well, I think it's key, again, for the South African economy, including low and medium income countries, in the sense that the economy has been stagnant for some time now. Of course, COVID has contributed to that. But materials really are key in stimulating new enterprises and really ensuring that there is economic growth. So you can see that there is a clear link and relationship to the most important national and international aspects in terms of the 3 interrelated pathways that are proposed by the EWA framework. And as part of our studies that we have done, in terms of reviewing the framework, interrogating that framework, critiquing that framework so that we can understand how it can be adapted for the South African local context, we have concluded that the EWA framework for transition to a circular economy is the most appropriate for the South African water sector. And I believe it is also applicable in some other low and medium income countries. Why? Simply because it covers all aspects of the water cycle and therefore can be easily adapted to our local conditions. Now, in terms of each pathway, the water pathway needs to be developed as a closed loop, and the factors that one has to consider will include looking at diversified resource options, so that we have got different options as your water sources in support of water security. You also need to look at efficient conveyance systems, which really relates to our situation where we have got a high non-revenue water loss, resulting in loss of income and also loss of security of supply. And then optimal reuse, so that we can ensure that the country is water secure. The options to be considered would include upstream investment for optimal conservation measures and pollution control. Pollution control is critical because industries and other anthropogenic activities would actually pollute our water resources. We need to ensure that those resources are actually secured, so that they've got the best quality of water that can be delivered for the citizens. Rainwater harvesting, which actually can be done at household level. Greywater recycling, wastewater reuse. I think it resonates with the RDI roadmap, where 75% of wastewater should be reused by 2030 in support of water security. Then we need also to reduce water loss in terms of leakages in potable water distribution systems. This relates to our non-revenue water, which used to be at 36%, but I'm told now it's sitting at about 41% nationally, at the cost of about 6 billion rands per year, which is really very unsustainable. Now, in terms of the material pathway, this must be able to compete with other products in the market for it to be successful and be sustainable. And key issues that needs to be considered for the material pathways will include the efficiency of resources recovery, the scale of production, because if you cannot scale your production systems, then you won't be in a position to recover the materials that presents themselves as opportunities as part of this pathway. The pricing and the quality of materials that you would recover from this pathway would also need to be competitive. And the consumer acceptance, it's a key one, where really consumers are very suspicious of resources that are recovered from waste, be it from a religious point of view or hygienic point of view, or just a perception point of view. So that is also to be dealt with. Then the energy pathway, the key objectives on the energy pathway include reducing the carbon-based energy consumption while increasing renewable energy production and consumption. This actually links up to our just energy transition, which sort of really discourage consumption of fossil-based fuels while we promote renewables. And the benefit of this is that it will actually contribute to the zero carbon emissions initiative as it relates to the climate change challenge. Right. The three transition pathways on water, energy, and materials presents what is called the critical junction, where water, energy, and materials intersect. And the important aspect with regards to that junction is that we've got opportunities that arise to transition to a circular economy. There are 7 junction opportunities relating to water-wise communities, wastewater treatment plants, drinking water treatment plants, industry, agricultural, natural environment, and energy generation. Some of these have been touched by previous presenters. And utilities can actually analyze these junction opportunities and gain some insight and take actions to create partnerships for transitioning to the circular economy within the water sector. I won't spend much here. This is just an extended narrative of what these junction opportunities mean in terms of what one can actually explore to transition the water sector to a circular economy. However, transitioning to a circular economy, be it the mainstream circular economy or transitioning to a water circular economy, is not a walk in the park. There are a number of challenges and barriers that we have, the main one being regulation and governance on the basis of the traditional linear economy that we are all used to. Then there is also aspects to do with economics and public perception, but technology is also a key barrier. And as part of our studies, we have really selected to deal with technology because of the need for full-scale implementation of innovative resource recovery technologies, which are still limited. We thought that that challenge presents an opportunity for us to begin to explore how technology really can be used to actually open up and unlock the opportunities of transitioning the water sector to a circular economy. And here we were trying to really explore emerging technologies that can actually take us to the technology readiness level of, say, 9, which is very close to implementation. So as part of that, what we have done in the past 5 years was to investigate emerging technologies based on enhanced hydrothermal polymerization. It's a technology that processes a wide range of biomass into a multi-use hydrochar. And the selection of such an emerging technology was done on the basis of placing wastewater treatment works as one of the junction opportunities that I highlighted earlier on at the center of that transition. So we have developed this technology from laboratory scale to pilot scale, and now it's moving up to upscaling with various partners who have come on board. And some of the partners actually include metros such as eThekwini and the South African Technology Enterprise Program, which has also contributed to actually coordinate the scaling up of this particular technology so that we can process a wastewater sludge, a municipal solid waste, as well as fecal waste into multi-use materials that can be used as part of promoting the circular economy. And as part of that development, what we actually have evaluated over the years is to confirm that this developed technology can actually be retrofitted into existing infrastructure, such as wastewater treatment plants, so that it can improve the performance of these wastewater treatment plants from a sludge management point of view. And this also ensures that existing infrastructure does not become redundant in terms of its use. And such technologies which can be retrofitted can actually sort of enhance their performance in terms of dealing with some of the challenges that we have in the sector at the moment. However, the technology can also be used as a greenfield technology using the closed loop circular economic concept for processing of biomass, whereby a cluster of households can actually bring their waste together, and then this can be processed into various materials, and you can recover irrigation water, you can recover soil conditioner, you can recover a biofuel material which can be reused by the same communities. So this is a technology that actually has got real application in terms of accelerating the transition of a circular economy within the water sector. Now, in terms of how we should approach the transitioning of a circular economy within the South African water sector, from a national point of view, we propose a water circular economy flagship program. And this flagship program can actually be conceptualized in terms of those 7 junction opportunities that I highlighted earlier on into 3 clusters. Don't mind about being able to read the other aspects that I have put on the slide. I know it's not very clear, but what is important here is we can define clear objectives for each and every cluster, and also be in a position to identify some outcomes that we would want to achieve, and also identify the funding streams that we would want to use to fund such a flagship program, and the implementation approach that would be required to actually drive each and every structure and the targeted end users. This is a proposed approach that I think can also be linked to the national strategy that the DSI is coordinating at the moment. But for the water sector, we believe that the need for a circular economy flagship program is critical so that we can drive some of these activities and accelerate the full transition of the South African water sector. And in terms of partnerships, which really was highlighted by the previous speakers, it's critical. You can see it's all inclusive in terms of the key partners that should be involved in such a flagship program, and also their roles that we envisage each and every partner and stakeholder should actually play. However, this is subject to discussion with the various stakeholders in terms of how it can align or realign to the national initiative, so that we don't really have silo programs or silo initiatives that are happening, which are not really well coordinated and well aligned in the interest of transitioning the whole economic sector in South Africa to a circular economy. So in terms of the research that we have funded to date, we have shared and disseminated some of the research to various platforms. I think we have written a number of newspaper articles so that we can engage a wider audience using the simplest of languages so that people can understand the need and the benefits, the challenges and the barriers. We've also written in popular magazines such as the Water Wheel, so that we can engage the technical people, the practitioners, to really have them understand where we should go with this initiative. And we have also published in our peer-reviewed journals so that we also engage the academic audience. And we have a number of book chapters that are coming through in the next few months so that we sort of communicate the outcomes that we have generated in the past 5 to 7 years in this space to a wider audience, both nationally and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor John, for that insightful presentation. What I like about all this presentation so far is that each and every one of them highlights the opportunities for the new entrants in the sector. So I think we have good days coming ahead of us. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, just cognizant of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and call in our last speaker. Our last speaker is Ms. Ngangi Mjimba Ncube, who is a portfolio manager at TIA within the Natural Resources Business Unit, whose focus areas are mining, mineral processing, water and wastewater, environmental management, and now circular economy technologies. So Ms. Ngangi has been with the TIA for 10 years and has successfully managed and managing a portfolio of projects. She has a geology background and has worked in various mineral exploration projects for major miners in Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, and Namibia for diamonds, coal, platinum, nickel, and gold deposits over 12 years with various teams. She has an MSc in engineering mining from Wits University and recently an MBA online. Ms. Ngangi is passionate about technologies, innovations, and technology development in mining, wastewater, now circular economy spaces. Ms. Ngangi, you may take the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Program Director, for that warm introduction. I've been asked to give a chat, maybe even thoughts around how maybe the technology innovation and also South Africa, maybe the DSI could actually a transition towards a circular economy when it comes to the mining sector. So I work for the Technology Innovation Agency, and mining is actually part of our portfolio. And we are also still putting our thoughts in line of what really this could entail. Okay, just to move on. Okay, so I've got an overview of my presentation. I'm just going to touch on what really has been already discussed. That is really the principles around what circular economy is and what it may mean. And then it's important that we have an overview of the landscape of the mining industry in South Africa. I thought it would be important also to touch on some of the pioneering recent work that has been done and studies around a circular economy in the mining sector. And I must say that a lot of work I borrowed from the CSIR, the work that has been done by Professor Linda Godfrey. I think it's important to look at some of the barriers and then the enablers to the transitioning towards circular economy in the mining space. So I work for the Technology Innovation Agency, and we are actually putting our heads and our thoughts around how the agency can actually potentially support this initiative. And then I'm going to conclude. So in terms of the principles of circular economy, we also subscribe to a widely accepted definition that actually comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it actually talks about circular economy being an economy that is restorative, generative, and it actually stresses issues around design. And it looks at keeping products and components and or materials at their highest utility and value at all times. There are other definitions there. These definitions talk about recycling, reuse, repurposing of materials. They actually talk about systems across supply chains, and they also touch on a possible remanufacture of different products from the recycled and reuse usage of material. What also has become important and what we are solidifying internally as TIA is the concept that a circular economy actually evolves around a closed loop economy. So here, instead of looking at a cradle to grave approach, this approach, we are understanding it to be more of a cradle to cradle approach. And I've got actually some authorities that have actually helped us to actually solidify our thinking there. Also, Professor Godfrey actually touched on circular economy, it being around the efficient use of resources. And so we also look at that definition or concept of circular economy around it driving the efficient use of resources. And that is actually through supporting circular use models rather than the traditional linear models. And I must say that in terms of mining generally has been that linear sort of type of approach. So the principles of circular economy have been touched before, but I'm just going to briefly mention them. This concept is actually based on 3 principles, that is the elimination of waste and pollution, circulation of products and materials at their highest value, the regeneration of nature and ecological system and environments. What is important to note also is that underpinning this circular economy is a transition to renewable energy and materials. So we believe that a circular economy is a good system for business, for people, for the environment. So just to give a high level overview of the mining industry and maybe touching on circular economy, what we found out was that the mining as an industry initially did not feature actually in the early concepts of circular economy. The reason for that is could be obvious. I mean, mining is seen as a dirty industry. Mining had been seen maybe as as somewhat irresponsible industry in the way that it actually managed the way that it managed the environment. But also when now it comes to the concept of circular economy, the mining industry is generally a take, make, and dispose sort of type of an approach to resources, and also it takes away from the environment. And there we are actually speaking about that linear model. But what we found out is that more recent studies are placing the circular economy, the mining sector, as a vital component of the circular economy. And that is through the sustainable use of resources, given that mining and minerals are actually finite in nature. So we are just stressing there that this circular economy will be very, very important, particularly with the current move towards a decarbonized world. But this decarbonized world requires and will require more minerals to be used. And we are looking at minerals there, such as lithium, cobalt, chrome, and platinum. So our gathering as TIA is that the concept of circular economy, particularly in the mining sector, may be relatively new. But however, we see that there are pockets of underlying, some of the underlying principles that are being actually applied from time to time. But I think one or two of the speakers have actually alluded to the fact that maybe the scale of the application may not be that meaningful, you know, for a visible impact. So we did a lot of research as TIA, and most of the work that we really found was the work that was done by the CSIR. I think I did mention that, and we are actually aligning some of our thinking in line with what the CSIR actually came up with. So when we were looking at how we can actually align our thinking and actually even come up internally with some of the strategies, we saw that alignment. So in terms of designing waste out, that is the first principle of circular economy. We do agree that it's important that the mining industry begins to think about redesigning some of the processes, maybe for a more efficient extraction of these ore bodies, so as to reduce waste. It's also important that we bring in issues around how can we best apply technologies around the fourth industrial revolution. Water in mining is also important. Also important that we look at, instead of not recycling our water within the mining environments, that we actually look at technologies that would possibly help to recycle the water for reuse in these environments. With regards to keeping the materials in use, it's important that the reduce, reuse, and recycle of the various streams be maintained within the mining value chain. A professor mentioned something. She said that in terms of the mining industry, most of the minerals are actually exported. But what we realized is that, yes, as much as the minerals may be exported, but we do have a lot of equipment that is actually used to actually extract these minerals. And this equipment does come to an end of life. And the question that we're asking ourselves is, what can this equipment, be used for after it actually comes to its end of life? We cannot ignore the mounds that we see on our landscape in South Africa. And there I'm talking about the mining dams and the tailings. So we believe that in part of keeping materials in use, looking at reprocessing of some of these tailing dams would actually help in the quest for a circular economy. We also understand that when it comes to minerals processing, some of the waste material is actually sent to landfill, but we are also alluding to the fact that we can actually look at ways on which we can actually limit some of these waste to landfill activities, maybe by finding ways that we can utilize some of the waste that is actually produced from the mining sector. Another interesting discovery that we came up with was the issue around the handling of e-waste, and us understanding that there's a lot of valuable material in e-waste, and we do subscribe to the concept of urban mining, and we actually see that also becoming an important sort of loop into the circular economy. Mining, by its nature, damages the environment. It's very important in terms of circular economy that mining activities begin to look at how the landscape can actually be restored. We cannot ignore the threat of acid mine drainage. In some of the reports that we've come across, we have understood that mining, the acid mine drainage pandemic in South Africa has actually been termed a ticking time bomb. So what we have seen also from the work that was done by the CSIR is that the reduction, the reuse and the recycling of materials within the mining industry is highly feasible to adopt. But what we've seen is that maybe designing waste out of this industry may be a little bit difficult. We have also seen that maybe the principles around regeneration of the natural systems may also be rather difficult. And there I did touch on issues around acid mine drainage. And we do know that it still is a problem. And we know that there are not very many solutions that have been proven to be economic out there. And our thinking is here is that this may be difficult and slower to adopt. So what are some of the barriers that may exist when it comes to transitioning to circular economy in the mining sector? I have had discussions maybe with also Professor Linda Godfrey that currently, generally, our feeling is that there is quite a wide sort of maybe understanding of, or should I say limited understanding of what a circular economy is really. And sometimes our feeling was that that could actually, in a way, also limit maybe the support for a circular economy projects and or activities. We think that maybe a dedicated policy framework for circular economy in South Africa, it is still fairly young, but we are actually excited about the work on the white paper as well as the decadal plan. And I can, and as TIA, we actually do support these initiatives of the Department of Science and Technologies. Also coming from the research that was done by the CSIR, and it's something that we tend to agree, is that mining companies are really all about business. And so they may actually view circular economy maybe as a non-core business activity, and therefore they may not actually consider it or any projects that may actually respond to this transition a priority. And also most mining leadership appointments tend to be limited, such that during that tenure, the leadership appointments are mainly looking at demonstrating shareholder returns. And so like there's no enough time to actually allow for some of these initiatives to mature. So some of the barriers are still, we believe that circular economy is still a relatively new field. And when it comes to research, we believe that it's still fairly also limited and is still fairly young. Moreover, when we come to scientific research and later on even funding, there was a touch by one or two speakers before me that talked about the ramp up, that maybe sometimes we do have things that are coming up, technologies that are coming up, initiatives that are coming up, but then how do we ramp up? And most of the times, the ramp up is actually associated to cost and or sometimes even appetite for these technologies. But what are the drivers that could be there, that could exist in the mining sector when it comes to circular economy? Again, Professor Linda touched on the issue around the critical minerals. And I just I came across a report, a recent report, that in 2022, the US listed 50 minerals, which they deemed critical in terms of supply. And knowing that most of the minerals actually do not come from their borders. And so issues around the security of supply become issues of concern. But now when we think about circular economy, we did touch on issues around sustainable extraction and use. So some of the minerals that are going to become important, or that the US has listed, would be minerals like your lithium, for the new electric vehicles, the cobalt for the cell phones, rare earth, as well as rare earth elements. We touched, even my previous speaker touched on, and everybody is aware now, for the transition even to clean energies or renewables, these technologies actually require different type of minerals, and circular economy also touches on this. Just to bring back everything home. So the research that we did, that was also done by the CSIR, was that South Africa identified 18 critical minerals. And yeah, and one of the things that also, unfortunately, I have to keep on referring to Professor Linda Godfrey, because we really referred to a lot of work that was done by the CSIR, was the issue around the resource scarcity, and looking at what resource are we sitting on as a country? Can we quantify that? Are we comfortable with what is remaining, and how best can we efficiently use whatever is remaining? So our belief is that this question around resource scarcity could be a driver to the transition to a circular economy. Some of the drivers that we also thought would be issues around creating a broader understanding of what circular economy is throughout all stakeholders. We believe that a dedicated framework for circular economy could be a driver. also for the transitioning, particularly in the mining space. We also believe that mining companies may still view, it's possible that mining companies can actually view circular economy as core to business sustainability. And we're also of the thinking that collaborative efforts would really help as a very important driver, particularly collaborative efforts between government, industry, and maybe NPOs. I think I saw a question sometime where somebody actually asked that in South Africa, we are actually facing issues around small-scale miners or illegal miners. How can those activities be actually, hooked into the circular economy? So some of the collaborative initiatives that us as TIA are currently looking at when it comes to mining activities, the issues around the demonstration fund that Dr. Henry Roman and Professor Linda Gray, Godfrey have actually spoken about. We are excited as TIA, and we are actually looking at collaborating on that fund and initiative. So we are a technology entity of the state, and our mandate is to support and stimulate and intensify technology innovation to improve the economic growth and quality of South Africans through the development and exploitation of technology innovation. I had to read that so as to bring to the attention that we are tasked mainly with our technology development and innovations. So our role there would be to support technology innovations in the circular economy space, and in this case, in the mining space. So we also support the DSI white paper as well as the Decadal Plan, and these are actually hinged on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So within TIA, we are organized in business units, and currently the units that are looking at initiatives and projects around circular economy would be the Natural Resources Business Unit, the Energy Use Business Unit, as well as the Agriculture Business Unit. I thought it would be good maybe just to touch a little bit on some of the technologies that are currently on the ground that may actually have some implications or touch on issues around circular economy. And you can actually go and have a look into our website and even in some of our annual reports. The first technology there is a technology called Trailblazer technology. This is a acid mine drainage treatment solution, which is actually based on ion exchange. It is patented, and it seeks to produce a near reverse osmosis water quality for agricultural purposes. But then all the salts that are actually won from the acid mine drainage are processed for chemicals that can be then used for the fertilizer industry. We are also currently embarking on funding a technology called the closure technology. It's a technology that is developed by the Mintech, and this one on the other side, it is a passive solution that is looking at treating of acid mine drainage and specifically for high to medium sulfate coal effluent, and we believe that it is a sustainable solution because it uses simple bags. We are also looking at issues around recycling of light bulbs, and there we are mainly looking at the recapturing of the rare earth minerals that actually line the inside of most of the fluorescent light bulbs. I did touch on the e-waste management. We are currently also looking at a technology that we thought would also potentially touch on circular economy. And this technology seeks to shred computer hard drives on site. And this material can be off-taken maybe by a small off-taker for possible local processing and smelting instead of exporting to Europe and India, as has been the practice. And the last one is.
Sorry, Ms. Mani, can I request that you wrap up? I'm looking at the time and I'm so sorry to just barge in like that. I do apologize.
Oh, okay. Now I'm almost done. So those are just some of the pictures. So that is Trailblazer. I was just showing how the setup looks like. And I talked about the closure system and we talked about collaboration. This one is a collaboration between TIA, Mintech, the University of Pretoria, and a major mining company. And it's now at demonstration stage and it's been commissioned, and also the water there is aimed for agricultural purposes. Those are just some of the pictures. Otherwise, we believe that the mining sector in South Africa is a mature industry. We believe that if there are opportunities for circular economy in mining, but we see that there may be need for much more established policies, regulations. More importantly, it will be collaborative approaches and via programs, maybe as opposed to ad hoc projects for meaningful impact. Otherwise, we believe that circular economy is a system that is good for business, people, and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ngani, for that wonderful presentation, giving us a circular economy perspective from the mining sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize for just rushing Ms. Ngani on a presentation, but we will request all the presentation from the speakers, and if they agree, we will share with everyone. So you'll get the information that she couldn't explain in detail. I see our chat box is currently very busy right now and we are running out of time, but we'll try and go through as many questions and comments as possible. And I'll also like to request our panelists to maybe start giving some of the to give some of the responses on the chat already. I think we can start with a few of the questions, and maybe the first question that we'll request that maybe Dr. Henry or Professor Linda Godfrey respond to is by Putela Mieni. So Putela is saying the political motivation to roll out industrialization as a means of addressing historic socioeconomic disparities is high, but how does this link up with circularity? It seems Chinese companies are keen on financing these industrial efforts, but what are the long-term environmental impacts? Are different approaches for developed and developing countries necessary in this case? I think this question has got a lot of questions inside it. So Professor Linda Godfrey and Dr. Henry, can you maybe kindly assist on this one for now?
I was stepping on a minefield with the first question out the gate. You know, I think it really speaks to the global economic model, which is, you know, it's really about making and selling and consuming more stuff. And you can't drive that kind of economic model when you live on a planet of finite resources. And so I think, you know, the opportunities around product as service, you know, can we get you know, goods and services to people in a completely different way? You know, I always use the example of the washing machine. Why do I own a washing machine when all I actually want to do is wash my clothes? And so there's opportunity for innovative types of business models where we don't necessarily own things, but we can access that particular product or good in a different way, which then incentivizes building and designing those products for longevity. Whereas at the moment, you know, designed obsolescence, we make things that are going to last long enough that I don't lose trust in the brand, but not too long that I don't come back and buy another one sometime soon. And so I think we need to rethink, you know, business models, but it's tricky because we are fighting against a big a big global economic model, but there's a lot of really innovative work happening internationally around how we do this. I think also, as well, as if we just look at post-pandemic, most countries in the world, in terms of just kickstarting their economies again, went back to very much sort of how do we rebuild local manufacturing. So it is what countries know, and it's a way of helping to support economic development. But again, I go back to my point in terms of the exciting opportunities for the African continent is that we have a way to rethink what our development path looks like, and I do believe that there are many people in South Africa who could benefit from accessing goods in a different way, in a non-ownership way, where currently they can't afford to do that. But yeah, it's a minefield of a question, that, and we could probably spend a whole day just talking about that particular question. Thanks.
That's true. Thank you so much, Professor Linda, for that detailed response. I don't know if Dr. Henry would like to add on that, or maybe we can just move to the next question. Dr. Henry.
Just a quick one. If you recall my presentation, I did outline that we've spent a lot of time trying to understand circular economy in a South African context. And that speaks to the last part of Putela's question. In terms of developed and developing countries, we have different levels of economic development, and we have to take that into account when we're looking at how we develop a circular economy plan for a particular country. So yes, in my view, the approach won't be identical between a developed and a developing economy. It cannot be, because we have different trajectories, different points in economic development, and that has to be taken into account. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry. Maybe whilst you're still on the floor, we can take a question from Owen, because in your presentation, you referred to the policies and the strategies that are guiding the circular economy. So Owen is asking, what is the current policy on encouraging municipalities to produce biogas from municipal waste? The current power shortage may encourage uptake of the technology. Thank you.
I think Professor Godfrey did answer that one in the chat as well. A very similar question. It's municipalities are encouraged. SALGA have put out a document encouraging them and showing them how to go about it. The problem you have is our landfills or dump sites are not designed for this purpose of landfill gas to energy. So we need to start looking at biogas from municipal organic waste, which can be done. There's no R&D to be done on this. It's a matter of implementation. The technology is mature and ready. It's buy-in from municipalities, and this is not a national government area of expertise or thing to do. It rests with the municipality. So the municipality has the ability to implement this should they be able to do it. I don't know if Prof. Godfrey wants to add anything.
Well, I think other than, I agree, Henry, is that a lot of these interventions, circular economy interventions that we're talking about, we could drop into South Africa tomorrow. Certainly in the waste sector, I've always said South Africa is probably 20 to 30 years behind the global north when it comes to alternative waste treatment technologies. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It becomes more an issue of how do we adapt those technologies to our conditions. How do we localize those technologies is probably where more of the emphasis needs to be. And organic waste is the single largest general waste stream produced in South Africa, and yet we're actually beneficiating very little of it. It's also the biggest contributor of the waste sector's contribution to our greenhouse gas emissions, which is why the waste sector is the second largest contributor in terms of methane to our greenhouse gas inventory. So it seems like a no-brainer that we should be diverting organic waste away from disposal to land. The Western Cape has put policy in place around zero organic waste to landfill. And whether it go to compost, whether it go to biogas, whether it go to biorefinery, there are a suite of different technologies that could be absorbing agri and agro-processing waste streams with significant beneficiation potential. And I think we have to look at whether we've got the right policy instruments in place to do that. Are we incentivizing? Are we disincentivizing that. But yeah, I'd love to see greater uptake of more alternative waste treatment technologies in our landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Linda Godfrey and Dr. Henry for the responses. Colleagues, I see Putela is keeping us very busy on the chat box, so I will take some of the questions, but I'll give other participants an opportunity as well. But I thought I should take this one for Professor John. So Putela is asking, is government supporting small-scale farmers in terms of water-saving technology? If not feasible due to high costs and administrative challenges, should small-scale farmers consider amalgamation in order to capitalize on innovative solutions that will ensure sustainability during drought periods? Professor John, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. But what I must really indicate is that the agricultural sector as a whole is allocated the greatest allocation from a water footprint point of view, 62%, in support of food security. That's the first. However, we understand that all the other sectors would need an increased allocation to sustain them, because if you have more than 50% already with a specific sector, and this is a general allocation, we're not discriminating between small scale farmers and big scale commercial farmers. So that's the first in terms of the government allocation. But then with our understanding from an R&D point of view that this is not sustainable, there is need to develop innovative technologies where you can actually do more with less, which actually talks to our water use efficiency in agriculture. We still need to sustain food security, but at the same time, bringing down that 62% allocation to a reasonable allocation level. And the only way to do that is through development of smart innovations. I think in Israel, they do things like drip irrigation, and some of the related technologies actually are also implemented in South Africa to ensure that we don't draw much from the water resources. We bring down that 62% to a reasonable level. And the emphasis from the Water Research Commission at the moment is to demonstrate some of these innovations, be it using less water, supporting crop production, sustainable agriculture at a demonstration scale. That is the strategic focus of the Water Research Commission. At the moment, we're not really doing fundamental research as far as agriculture is concerned. The research has shifted to demonstration level, focusing on small-scale holder farmers. So we are in that space in terms of supporting small-scale holder farmers. When that will have significant impacts, I think it's just a matter of time. It takes time for these things to filter into the whole country in terms of realizing impact. Impact can be realized over a slightly longer time, but I agree, it's an area that we have identified and is an area that we are venturing into in terms of demonstrating some of these innovations among small-scale home farmers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor John. I see there's a lot to talk about and to discuss, and I don't think we have enough time. I think we must blame the organizers for not giving us enough time to have these discussions. Maybe let me just take one or two questions, and then I will hand over to Dr. Let me get it right, Matabane, to give us closing remarks. But there's a question from Randall. He said the success of HTE-CE business models are reliant on the size of their opportunities. So the only reliable source of volume and value of the waste material being generated is the state of the waste report of 2017-2018. Has there been any update? When is the next state of waste report coming out? I don't know if Dr. Henry can take that for us.
I'll start and I'll hand over to Prof. Godfrey. But
thank
the
you.
State of Waste report, I'm not sure when the next one is coming out. But in terms of analyzing the opportunities, the State of Waste report is not the sole supplier of the information. The material flow analysis that was done is an indicator for us of where the opportunities may be. And we are looking at, in time, I won't say when, in time, redoing it at a more discrete level so that we can actually look at sectors at a later stage. Not right now, we're not in a position to do that at this point in time, but when we have the sufficient amounts of data that can allow us to do it, we're going to look at it more discreetly. I'll hand over to Prof. Godfrey as well.
Yeah, I think other than just to say, yeah, Randall, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, Environment is the custodian of the State of Waste report, so I'm not sure when their plans are to publish the next version of that. But I think most of our speakers this morning have spoken to this issue around digitalization, around the interface of 4IR and the circular economy, big data, smart cities, all of these kinds of things. And I think certainly we need to look at how we can collect more data and use that data wisely as we transition to a circular economy. So John's response around, how do we decouple the agricultural sector from water consumption, precision agriculture, again, the value of having all of that data at your fingertips in terms of, what are the climatic conditions today? Should I irrigate? Should I not irrigate? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity around how we use data to transition to a more circular economy. The question is just, do we have the ability to manage, interpret, and utilize that data? And I suppose that's the big question. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Linda and Dr. Henry for the responses. There was a question around mining, and I don't know if Ms. Ngangi can be able to maybe talk to it, like for 30 seconds, if it's possible. So there was a question from Putela around mining. So she was asking, is uncontrolled illegal mining in South Africa a deal breaker in terms of establishing a green economy supported by specific metals? Hi, Ms. Nganyi, or any of the panelists, maybe if they have a response. Have I lost Ms. Nganyi on the call? Right. So sorry about that. It's, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if there's anyone who can be able to take that question for us. Otherwise, the time on my phone is, on my watch, it's 11:53, so we can still take 2 more questions. Maybe when Ms. Nganyi come back, she can then be able to help us with that question. Maybe we can look at another question as well. Okay, that's great. All right. So there's this one. Professor John, your hand is up. You can go ahead.
I just wanted to assist with that one because we have been actually discussing it with the Department of Water and Sanitation as well as Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, trying to really provide some recommendations as part of the work that we do together. For me, from where I sit, I think illegal mining it's a safety issue, really, which should not happen in terms of policing. These are people who are doing something that is illegal, and we know the impacts and the implications of their activities. And there are regulations really which actually regulate mining. You can only mine when you've got a mining license. You are allowed legally to do that. So if you are illegal, my take is that you just need to be arrested. That's the only thing that we can do to that. Leaving it to happen, unless the government wants to regularize it in an orderly manner, But when you go to that space, it's really a very disordered kind of operation. And I don't foresee a situation of how the government can actually sort of regulate it and allow it to happen in a regulated environment. So for me, my take is that there should be increased police patrolling. These people get arrested and this thing is put to an end up until the government is able to put in some kind of legislation which would actually allow the artisanal miners to operate as part of the post-mining kind of operation, which can be regulated so that we can safeguard our water resources, we safeguard our land and all the other infrastructure that needs to be safeguarded from an illegal point of view.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the response. I think we can now wrap up this discussion, looking at the time. So maybe let me just take this opportunity and thank everyone who has participated, our panelists for sharing that body of knowledge. We truly appreciate that. And also the participants on the chat box. Thank you so much for engaging. I will hand over to Dr. Matabane to give us a vote of thanks. Thank you. You can take over, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Sister Ntombi. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Council, we would like to extend our sincere gratitude to all the presenters and the moderator, as well as the Mrs. Ntombi already alluded to. Indeed, this was a very informative, it was thought-provoking and very insightful webinar. And it is evident from all the speakers today that transitioning towards a circular economy in South Africa is not only a crucial step towards achieving a sustainable future, but it will also require a collaborative effort from all stakeholders across all the sectors. And the speakers also highlighted the importance of using innovative technologies or digitization. So this represents an important opportunity to create a more prosperous and sustainable future for everyone in South Africa. We'd also like to thank all the participants for attending this important webinar. It is truly inspiring to see so many individuals come together to discuss the importance of adopting circular economy principles. We really had an engaging and informative session, and we hope that you have found this information presented valuable and insightful. Your participation and also the questions posed under the chat truly made the session a success. As we move forward, it is important that we continue to explore and promote circular economy practices by working together so that we can create a more sustainable and resilient economy. Once again, thank you very much for being part of this important conversation. And I just want to announce that everyone will receive the CPD certificates after this, and do enjoy the rest of your day further. Thank you very much, colleagues.